So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This is a little bit of a off-the-cuff episode. I was just sitting here doing some work and decided that I wanted to record something that's been on my mind lately. I'm really trying to capture the energy of these insights and ideas as they come through because I feel like there's much more clarity and intuition when it first comes through, whereas if I wait till my podcast day and do the recording then, I kind of lose the steam of the idea that's coming through. So anyway, what has been on my mind lately? I have been working with a patient. He is in his 60s. He has chronic pain, significant trauma background, Lyme disease, a litany of symptoms, GI stuff, etc. And so he and I are working really steadfast on doing nervous system reprogramming, all the stuff that I do to help people understand what is my body programmed with that's keeping me stuck in this state of survival. When we experience trauma, we develop certain beliefs and ways of being in the world. Our nervous system orients to the world differently, and it creates stories and ways of seeing and believing and thinking and existing in the world. As we move through life, we continue to show up in that way of being. Trauma kind of programmed us to adapt to or shift into this new way of being that continues this feedback loop of telling our nervous system we are not safe. If we continue to respond and show up in the way that trauma programmed us to show up and respond, then it's telling our nervous system that threat, that traumatic thing is still around. Because if it wasn't, why else would we be responding that way? So it's a tricky feedback loop. And that is the work to understand, again, what are the stories, what are the programs, what are the things that my nervous system took away from that event that we need to rewire and change the nervous system's orientation to in order to shift you out of that state of survival so you can heal. That's the beautiful thing about the nervous system and the body is that it can shift, it can change, it's malleable. It's, there's this thing called neuroplasticity where we know the nervous system and the brain isn't this fixed thing that can never shift, right? There are ways in which we can reprogram, reorient, and therefore heal. This gentleman and I have been working on this for a few months together. We had this conversation, we kind of drifted into this place of talking about pain. He mentioned something about childbirth, how childbirth is always painful and how certain things are always a certain way. I have two kids. One of them is 4 and one of them just turned 1 at the time of this recording. My first pregnancy and childbirth experience absolutely backs up what he said. And that was that childbirth is painful. And I had that story and that expectation going into that delivery. And I'm someone who I'm really stubborn around a lot of things. My own healing journey was all about not taking medications and not doing what they said. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that way. I suffered a lot unnecessarily. That's just kind of who I am. So childbirth comes around, right? I'm getting ready to give birth and I'm like, I'm not going to do an epidural and I'm not going to take do the things that they offer to make the process more painless and easy. I'm just going to give a quote unquote natural delivery and I'll get through it. I didn't have a plan. I just was like, I just know that I'm not going to do an epidural or anything else. That was a bad idea. So I went into labor. Long story short, it was a very painful experience. I had my mom's birth stories in my head. She tells me about when I was born and what it felt like. I have it drilled into my head because she has this thing where she would kind of tell me my birth story every birthday. There's a lot that's beautiful, special about it, but it was drilled into my mind from an early age, what it was like to give birth. I mean, pretty much anyone you talk to, right? The focal point of the birthing experience in a big way is on what was painful, what was uncomfortable, what was traumatic, etc. And then you think about media or movies and, the women screaming and throwing things and abusing their partners or whatever in the experience, right? So there's this cultural familial story that giving birth is painful. My patient was talking about that, being like, this is inevitable, certain things are just painful. I reflected back to him, I would have agreed with you had I not had my second child. That delivery was 99.9% pain-free. He was like, excuse me, this is not what people talk about. It's hard to believe that could be true because that's just not the story. I explained to him that I learned my lesson from my first delivery, that going into childbirth without a plan is a bad idea. And why that was, because all I knew was what I knew from other people. And so that became my story. Fast forward to my second delivery of my second son. One of my doctors at the time actually recommended, like, hey, you should look into something called Hypnobabies. And I'm sure a lot of you listening know what that is. And he kind of mentioned, like, humans are the only animal that really scream during childbirth or have such a reaction to it. Most animals are totally silent. Sometimes we've seen these nature videos of animals giving birth for dogs. They're panting or grunting, but they're not howling. That's not the relationship that a lot of other animals, maybe all animals, have with childbirth. It's a very uniquely human experience. So I did the program, Hypnobabies. I'm totally giving it a shout out. It's so worth it. If you are pregnant, do it, because it's a self-hypnosis program. It teaches you how to be in relationship with the sensations of labor differently. They don't call it labor. I can't remember what they call it now, but everything about the program in Hypnobabies is so applicable to this healing journey that we go on. They change the wording. I think they call it your birthing time or something like that. The big thing that they're working on in the Hypnobabies world is for you to reorient your relationship to pain, where you're not just thinking of it as painful and horrible. Like, they don't say contractions, they say something else. I think they call it like birthing rhythm or something like that. People in the comments can fill in if this is helpful to know. So essentially, I reoriented through my self-hypnosis process that what my body was experiencing when it was having contractions was not a negative experience. It was just my muscles moving to help move my baby out of my body. There's a lot of layers and different videos and classes you take through the Hypnobabies process to get ready for delivery. You start it in the third trimester. There's certain tracks you listen to when labor begins. There's certain things you listen to when you're in active labor. I did the whole thing. I went into labor at 6 a.m. on June 1st. I knew it was the real deal because I had experienced this before, but I was totally pain-free right from the get-go. I was feeling the contractions and I immediately got into my hypnosis zone, and it was just kind of with my body and feeling these birthing waves. I had no experience of pain. I was like, okay, maybe it's a fluke. I was not convinced that this was going to work. So the day goes on, the day goes on, the day goes on. I'm laying in bed, doing my hypnosis process. I'm just meditating and breathing and relaxing. I'm talking, I'm up and about, I'm eating. 12 hours later, 6 p.m., my birthing waves, or whatever they call them, my contractions are pretty regular, right? So they're like 3 minutes apart. And my husband's like, we need to go to the hospital. But I was so relaxed that there was no sense of urgency or fear in my body, because I was like, well, I feel fine. I feel energized. I feel awake, alert. My body did not feel urgent in any way, shape, or form. So I took a shower. I hugged my son goodbye, Felix, my oldest. Very tearful departure for me, because I knew the moment we left the house, our lives would never be the same. Like, we'd be bringing a baby back and the dynamic was forever changed. I had an emotional goodbye, drove to the hospital. The whole way there, breathing, talking. Whenever a contraction would come around, there's a thing where you move into a different headspace, do your hypnosis thing, and then you can come back out of it. And so we get to the hospital, and the intake nurse, decides if they're going to admit you to the hospital or not, because they don't want to just take anyone who's having contractions, because as those who have given birth know, it can be like, you are like 2 minutes into this process and you have days to go. They just make sure that you're ready so that when they admit you, you're not going to be there for days on end. And so I was fairly dilated, maybe 6 or 7 centimeters by that point. I think, 10 is the full dilation. They decided to admit me, even though I was not behaving as someone who was close to giving birth. It's 6, 7 o'clock at night. The nurse said, you've been in labor all day. It's nighttime. We'll let you come in. You're fairly dilated, so you can sleep here tonight and we'll see what happens. She was not thinking that I was going to be giving birth anytime soon. So we go in the room and get settled. I'm in my bed. I'm doing the hypnosis. I don't really remember what happened between now and when I gave birth because I was so deep in the zone. I had my birthing request. I didn't want any cervical checks because the nurses will often come in every so often and check how far along you are dilation wise. I did have a contraction monitor on so they could watch the rate of my contractions and intensity of my contractions out in the nursing station. But that was it. I didn't have any interventions. I didn't have anyone coming in the room. The nurse came in a couple of times, and in the nursing notes, it says that I was asleep. And actually, when they thought I was asleep, I was in active labor. Active labor is kind of this crescendo, most intense, often most painful part of the labor process right before you start to get the urge to push. I was in the throes of active labor when they came in to check on me, which I guess now I'm understanding is why they came in to check on me. She thought I was asleep because I was in such a deep state of hypnosis. It was starting to feel intense in my body. I was starting to get to a place where I felt very much on this edge of like, I could lose my edge right now. I could lose my kind of concentration and like go into this place of discomfort and, kind of more of that elevated, activated state that we see in movies and on TV around labor. But I kept it together and I stayed with my hypnosis. I moaned like I did what animals did when I started making more moany type sounds or breathing more heavily. My husband said he could tell I was in a deep state of labor, but he didn't disturb me. He was just sitting there with me and, didn't intervene because I wasn't asking for it. And then at 1:20 a.m., I thought I had to go to the bathroom, but I knew from my previous birth experience with my first son that when I had that urge, it felt like I had to go to the bathroom. What was really happening was my water wanted to break. I told my husband, I have to go to the bathroom. It might be my water breaking, FYI. Like, this is what it felt like last time. So I went into the bathroom, sat on the toilet. Lo and behold, yes, the water broke. And so my husband went and told the nurse. When he came back, I was like, something's happening. And I reached down and my son was coming out. I wasn't even trying. I wasn't pushing. My body was literally just letting him out. Just before I got to that place of feeling like I needed to push, in the peak of that intensity of my labor experience, connected to my body and tuned in, I recognized that I was resisting releasing him from my system because I have this thing with pain. When we're in pain, we restrict, we close in, we clench, we hold. That makes the pain worse, right? It reinforces the pain or it increases the pain because there's this resistance that we're feeling in response to the pain. And that's actually why I think I almost lost my edge with my labor process, because I was starting to get more in my head about it, being like, this is supposed to be really painful. So my body was starting to move into that remembering place of responding to what my body was going through versus staying with what was happening. And so when I was able to tune back in, I was able to be like, okay, my body's resisting releasing my son because of this story. And so I had this visualization of a flower blooming. So I was picturing my body, my uterus, my cervix as this blooming flower, this opening. And the moment I did that visualization and gave my body permission to release my son, that's when I got that urge to push. So I go in the bathroom, I push, felt like I had to go to the bathroom. So I just pushed, my water broke, but then immediately my son was right there. He was crowning, his head was crowning. And I'm just like saying this with awe because it still like shocks me. And for people who've gone through this process, you understand why this is a shocking experience for it to just be there. Usually when you get the urge to push, the baby is still in your body and not crowning. You have to work at getting the baby to come out or crown. I remember whispering to my husband, like, the baby. And he was like, what are you saying? What's happening? I was like, he's right here. The nurses come in, like, so at this point, it's like 1:23 or 4 in the morning. The doctor is on call because it's in the early wee hours of the morning. They call the doctor. It's too late. They are like, get off the toilet, get into the bed. And I'm like, I can't. I'm like, the baby is coming out. Like, I literally am not going to be able to make it back to the bed. So they just had me stand up and they caught him, Julian, my son, with me standing up in the bathroom. It looked like a horror scene. So they catch him and I didn't push him, right? I just literally stood off the toilet and he just came right out with my body just literally pushing him out. And so all told, from the urge to push to when he actually was delivered was 5 minutes. I pushed for 45 minutes with my first son, which I know is not even like, some women push for hours. I know with second children, things can go faster, but the point in all of this, and so I shared all this with my patient, The point in sharing this with you is because the moral of the story is that it is our relationship to something that dictates how that thing is going to be. I had that conversation with that patient, and he was like, okay, I feel like I really need to do some Hypnobabies stuff, even though I know I'm not going to have a baby. Like, he's like, I'm recognizing like I have such a mindset around my pain. Like, there's this clenching, there's this clamping, there's this holding pattern that comes on board, like I was talking about. And it creates this fear pain cycle. So what's going on in your body is part of the quote unquote problem. Like, if you are fearing what's happening in your body, if you're resisting it, if you are having this expectation of how it's going to be, and having this story of like, it's always going to be this way, then yes, that is going to be the story. And so, again, that's why I shared my experience. I then had this other conversation with someone who just joined my membership, the Sacred Illness membership. And she was saying, which was this amazing kind of insight for her to have, where she was saying, I want to be surrounded by a different narrative around my illness. And, with childbirth as well, where she knew if she was surrounded by really negative stories, that would influence her. She had a few experiences in her life where she recognized if she was surrounded by a certain narrative, then that narrative became her narrative, or it became very hard for her to not be influenced by that narrative. And so she has Crohn's, which is what I have. Heard my story. Someone referred her to me who I went to school with and who knows I have Crohn's disease. My colleague who referred this person to me into my membership was like, you need to, talk to Erin because she has a different experience with Crohn's. She has a different story with it. And that is going to be really important for your healing journey. She's in my world now to have a different experience and to be surrounded by a different story. That is the heart and soul of Sacred Illness. It's the heart and soul of the work that I do. It's to help us have a different relationship with what our struggles and our pain and our suffering is all about. And by doing so, it therefore transforms the pain and the suffering. If we frame it as pain, bad, negative, scary, horrible, detrimental, never going to change, always going to ruin my life, if we have that story, if we see the woman on TV screaming bloody murder and punching the doctor in the face when she's giving birth, and that's our only story, that's our only experience, that is what we believe to be true. Whereas if you hear some story like mine around giving birth and what's possible, it can change everything, right? My story around giving birth, or my story around my Crohn's disease, or other people who have these different experiences around healing and their relationship with their body and their challenges, we can therefore open our mind and say, there's more than one story. There's more than one narrative. The challenge with the Western medical paradigm is that it has one narrative, right? I was having that conversation with this person who just joined the membership. She was saying like, yeah, of course, what they tell you is scary. And what I was told essentially was, you're going to be on medications for the rest of your life. Potentially, you're going to have surgery. Like this percentage of people who have Crohn's disease eventually have surgery. It's just not a very exciting outlook. When you get diagnosed with a chronic illness, there's not exactly sunshine and rainbows or a lot of anecdotes of hope. I think doctors are also sort of reticent to give hope to their patients, which is understandable because we live in this world of cover your ass kind of thing. Don't give hope or hand out stories of potential healing, because then they're going to sue you or you're going to get in trouble for promising something you can't deliver on. It's so backwards. But that's why I'm here, right? Because my work is based on this idea of changing the paradigm, changing our perspective, changing what we think and how we are in relationship with pain and suffering. And when we hear these stories of like, yeah, I had XYZ thing and this is how it was for me, it just cracks something open in us where it's like, okay, there is more than one way that this is going to go down. The story is not written for me, right? This prognosis I've been given is not the only version of this book that's being written for my life. I actually get to write these chapters. And I think what is true is that if you, using this book analogy, read the book of the prognosis that's given you from your doctor, and that's the only thing you ever read, that is going to be your reality, because what our mind becomes familiar with, it's going to expect. So if this is the only thing you're familiar with around your disease, pain, suffering, or experience, that's what you're going to expect, and that's what's going to happen. This is not woo, right? This is a way in which our body orients to the world and how the nervous system functions and responds to things and creates our reality. we need to be mindful of the stories we're surrounding ourselves with. So if you think about like Facebook groups, when I think about who we surround ourselves with in our healing work, like let's say you have Crohn's and you join a Facebook group for Crohn's disease warriors or survivors. Even in that language, there's a problem because it's pitting you against your body, your diagnosis as an enemy, as a problem, as a negative thing. I understand why we have that mentality of being sick and having symptoms are uncomfortable. We don't love to suffer. The point is that challenges are challenging and there's no two ways about it. But if we are joining these groups that are all about bemoaning the condition, and we're talking about the surgery we had, the side effects of the medication, and how nothing is helping or we're getting sicker, I feel like there's very few stories of hope within those groups. It's more just this place where we can feel seen in our suffering, which is important. If there's no other story being told, then there's no other outcome that becomes possible. Because then you have this double whammy of like, my doctor told me this is my prognosis and this is what I should expect. We joined the support group, right? And all the stories in there are just reflecting that same prognosis. So we have to find that seed of hope in other places. We have to find that story in other places. As you're listening to this, I encourage you to reflect on like, what are you surrounded by in terms of just not just even with health and wellness, but definitely that's a starting place. Like, what stories did you grow up around? What was your family's relationship with health and healing and wellness? What was their relationship with doctors and the medical field in general? How do they relate to pain and suffering and difficulty? Do they have a mindset of hope and possibility, or are they very locked in and set on like, this is what this means and that's it? Is there a fixed mindset where there's just one way and one option and one outcome? Or is there more open-mindedness and a willingness to see what else is out there? Those early experiences that you had around illness and injury and suffering and pain are playing a big role in how you're showing up and in relationship with it in your own life. You can rewire those stories, but it's important that you recognize those stories are part of your makeup. That's part of the work, is for you to recognize, what stories am I preloaded with from childhood that kind of informed me what illness is about and what pain is about and what to expect from it? How do I unwind or rewire those stories? And then present day, what am I surrounded with? Am I surrounded by that Facebook group where the only story in there is how much this thing hurts and how it's going to get worse, or how there's no answer, or how no one is helping? Or am I surrounded by a mix of things where I can empathize with the suffering and be seen in that, but also I'm surrounded by folks who are talking about like, hey, I tried this new thing and this is really helpful, or like I have this new orientation or this new outlook, or whatever that might be. Are you in a locked place where there's one outcome, or are you opening yourself up to different possibilities? My advice, for what it's worth, is to surround yourself more with the stories of possibility, way more than you are with those locked stories. I don't think those locked stories are bad. It's important to feel seen in your suffering, but can you be seen in your suffering with this air of also possibility side by side? Can you say childbirth can be painful and I'm open to there being this other way that it can show up for me? Yes, this diagnosis is challenging and these are the ways in which it gets in the way of me being who I want to be. And I'm open to the idea that there can be meaning and purpose and a gift inside of this suffering, which is the sacred illness paradigm, where within our illness actually lies the greatest gift, which is to reconnect to yourself, to guide you back to yourself. Illness, after all, is born out of survival stories that we have adopted from early on in life that take us away from who we are and keep us locked in survival patterns. And so illness itself is this key to reconnecting with who we are and our purpose and our reason for being here, kind of that bigger why of our life. There is a gift inside of that suffering. How can we as humans balance acknowledging and validating the challenges we face within our illness, and also at the same time holding this air and this energy of possibility and hope and even excitement of like, where is this leading me? What is possible for me? Where could this go? We have to open that closed door, be mindful of where the doors feel closed and why, and where did that come from, and how can we open those again to open our mind and shift our story. It doesn't have to be our story. There are so many ways in which we can show up in this world. There are so many ways in which our bodies can heal and things can shift. One book I really love is called Cured by Jeffrey Rediger, I think is how you pronounce his last name. His book is filled with what we think of as miraculous cures, healing moments that just shouldn't happen. People who have terminal brain cancers but survive. He deeply explores what allows us to heal. It's not lifestyle, diet, genetics. It really comes down to what are you surrounding yourself with? What are you believing? How are you living your life? What story are you telling yourself every single day? Who are you surrounded by? What is the world in which you are inundated and surrounded by? And how is that playing a role in what you're expecting and creating in your own reality? Let this be hopeful for you. If I can have a childbirth that is 99.9% pain-free, you can have a body that feels different, healthy, healed, safe, and just more open to possibility than it does right now. If you are interested in taking this journey further or looking at what this could feel like, I really encourage you to join the Sacred Illness membership. We are exploring these stories. We are creating a new paradigm. We are rewriting what we think is set in stone and finding new ways to exist in our bodies and to be in relationship with what our illness is all about. And then we go deeper into, what is our illness all about? What is it asking me to become? What is the invitation? What is the gift inside of my suffering? How do I take this painful experience of suffering and actually turn it into the most beautiful invitation of my life and to take me into this place of really deep healing, really deep meaning, and like really deep existence. So thanks for listening to this little brain download. I hope it was helpful for you. I'll put the references down below for the book that I mentioned and Hypnobabies and all the good things. And I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. If you find this information shared here inspirational and educational, please share it with those you think would benefit from this work. To take this work deeper yourself, check out our website, www.aurorasomatic.com, where you can explore our coaching, community, and course options. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel where new content is coming out all the time, intended to inspire, awaken, and help you deepen your relationship with yourself, your life, and your world. We'll see you next time.